The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally.
Welcome to a new episode of Supplementing Health. I'm very excited to have on today with us Joy McCarthy. And Joy has been on our show before and is a very inspiring, very engaging founder of Joyous Health. She's a best-selling author and health expert. She's been featured in a number of publications, television, radio shows, and really understands and complements the whole gamut of wellness and health. And so we're very excited to talk to her today about the reality of self-care and how we can build systems of practical self-care to start alleviating some of our stressors. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love this topic, and I'm so happy that you are tackling it, and it's going to be a great chat.
One of our most important relationships is that with ourselves. So what would you say self-care means to you?
Well, I agree 100%. It's, just to echo what you said, it's self-love is the first love, right? And I would even go as far to say that self-care to me is really self-love. And that it's really just creating space, carving out a little space for your well-being. And, in my case in particular, I definitely carve out space. Sometimes it is really a very small amount of space in the day, and sometimes I have more time. But, I certainly do make self-care a priority in my everyday because it helps me be more productive. It boosts my levels of happiness. It helps me be a better mom, a better partner, and be more compassionate in the world.
I love that. The approach that if you show up as your best self, you're now able to be as engaged in the world around you and the people around you. Can you speak a little bit to how that physically manifests and how there's benefits, physical benefits to our self-care?
Absolutely. So, when we are sort of in the chronic stress response, we're basically living in, sympathetic nervous system mode. So fight, flight, or freeze. And this is not healthy for us. Acute stress, sure, that's fine. Acute stress, when our heart rate increases, our blood pressure, our pupils dilate. I think those things are all fine if it's temporary. But the problem is that so many of us just live in a chronic state of stress. And so there's so many benefits of, whether it's meditation or just doing some breath work, like box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, which we can talk more about in a bit. Instead of stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, when you do something simple as doing box breathing, you are immediately affecting your biology. You're stimulating the relaxation of response. So you're, stimulating the parasympathetic nervous response. This is, your rest and digest. When you slow down your breathing rate, you slow down your heart rate. So this is, long-term better for your cardiovascular health. So there are just so many different benefits. And obviously the biggest one is just lowering stress. And when you lower stress, we could go on and talk about why stress is not good for us and how it can be harmful in the long term. So obviously, you mitigate all those negative effects of stress when you make a point of having self-care. I'm a big fan of like self-care rituals, like even just having one ritual a day that you know is like always for you. That's just something that, you know, stimulates a relaxation response, calms your stress hormones, and helps you better. And there's just so many physiological benefits of, you know, getting out of that chronic state of stress for your health and well-being, and even your longevity, increasing your lifespan. You know, if you look at the blue zones, which are the 7 areas of the world where people are living to 100 and older, these people have self-care rituals, but they don't necessarily, it's not like us in Western countries, we're like, I'm doing my self-care ritual with my crystals and my candles. You know, it's just a part of people's life. They don't even see it as self-care. It's just a ritual that people have every day that really supports their well-being.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because I think living with my 92-year-old grandfather for a period of time, you see
Oh,
how
wow.
confused it is. You know, he will do these little things like he'll have his beet juice, or he'll have a consistent routine. And I love that you
Mm-hmm.
said a routine that you do every day. And I think the part that I try to infuse or help my patients understand is it needs to be consistent. And for consistency, we need to recognize sustainability.
Yes.
Many patients come in talking about the stressors in their life. They're, you know, usually broken down into finances, relationship, and healthcare. Um, and we're often sold this idea self-care is really glamorous. It's very indulgent. It's
Mm-hmm.
very about, you know, the bubble baths. And as you kind of mentioned, like, let's take out our crystals. How do you approach more the practical side of self-care?
Yeah, so you're so right. We do often think of those glamorous things, you know, whether it's, you know, getting a massage for $100 or, you know, going to a chiro appointment. And of course, all of those things can be very beneficial, but they're not quite practical for everybody. And I certainly don't. I would love to go for monthly massages. I can even tell you the last time I went for a massage, but I'm okay with that because, you know, there's so many other things that you can bring into your day that actually don't cost anything whatsoever. We just talked about one of them, which is, you know, stimulating the relaxation response by focusing on breathing. So it doesn't have to be glamorous or indulgent. It can be, you know, a walk in nature. So I think that self-care is actually available to anybody. But you know, it's great we're doing this episode because I think a lot of times people just need ideas because they do automatically go to, oh, getting a manicure is, you know, that's how I take care of myself, or getting a blowout of my hair, which is,
Mhm.
again, those things are fine, but it's not attainable and it's not sustainable for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, it's access points. I would love to see more opportunity for access points to s- some of those indulgent things for people who traditionally would be able to get it. But then also the you know, kind of leveling up our self-care is are things that also feed into reducing those immediate stressors. So that can be like meal prep. I know you have so many tools on your website that help people meal prep and create schedules. What are those important tools and resources that you think people actually need to be consistent, to have those routines and
Yeah.
regimes?
Yep. So, I mean, I have hundreds of free recipes on my website, but I think the key thing for people is that you need to get organized because there's self-care rituals, you know, whatever it is, say your self-care ritual is, you know, going for a nature walk for 20 minutes every day. Those rituals fall off track when we have all this busyness and our lives feel hectic. Then we don't have time for those self-care rituals, or rather we don't make time. So I think it's really key with other health priorities to get organized. And that's why meal prepping, meal planning is so beneficial because it just takes the complication out of eating. And I would say for me, especially, eating well, eating nourishing food that tastes really yummy is absolutely part of my self-care, self-love routine every day. That is one thing that to me is an absolute priority in my life, is eating good food. But I wouldn't be eating good food if I didn't, something that I started doing about 2, 3 months ago was I started ordering my groceries online because I felt like I just didn't have enough time to go to the grocery store, walk around, even though it's something that I enjoy doing. I just felt like things were really busy. So I thought, you know what? It's just going to be easier for me once in a while to just order my groceries online. So getting organized, that's just a simple way to get organized, whether it's ordering your groceries online. If that's not available where you live, then it could be, writing out your list of groceries. Like something I do is I have a little notepad that is stuck to my fridge, and every day whenever I run out of a grocery item, so I don't forget it, like say I run out of almond butter, I just jot it down on the notepad, and I grocery shop once a week. So I always make sure I feel very organized and I don't ever forget anything because I have that kind of list that's on an ongoing list. And something else I do when it comes to food, which helps me get organized so that I do have time for my self-care rituals, is I like on the weekends, usually it's on a Sunday afternoon. While I don't meal prep for the whole week, I know some people do that. I just don't do that because a lot of our weeknight meals are not where I'm like in the kitchen for an hour. Like a lot of our weeknight meals are super simple, like, sweet potatoes that I pop in the oven with some fish. So dinner is ready in like 25 minutes max, and most of it is just cooking in the oven. But what I was going to say is on Sundays, I do like to do sort of one baking item. So I might do muffins or energy balls, so I have a quick and healthy snack. And I also like doing like one big soup or stew, so I have it for the week. So then I also have, quick and easy lunches, because I feel like dinners for me, I always have a good sense of, okay, I know what protein we're going to have. I'm going to build the meal around that based on the fact that I've grocery shopped. So that was a really long answer, but I just really like talking about food. And it's such like an important part of my life. I am a nutritionist. Food is my life. So I think getting organized around your nutrition is really key so that you have time for other things.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is you're making a lot of those decisions and really thinking about things. And it may sound, especially initially, to someone that like, oh my gosh, I have so much to think, I have to do so much work to organize. But I'm sure at a certain point, it just transitions to like a very quick calculation in your mind of like, okay, I'm gonna do these certain bits. But it's that starting that almost feels the most difficult. Is that
Absolutely. It can be a bit intimidating, I think. But, I think it is a good idea to have a bit of a plan. Like something I do, I have a 6-year-old, and obviously we make her lunches every day. So on Sunday nights, after we've done the grocery shop, we always grocery shop on the weekends. On Sunday nights, I actually jot down on a piece of paper that's also stuck on the fridge what her lunches are going to be Monday to Friday, because we don't make it the night before. We always make it the morning of. And I just don't want, the mornings are busy, and I just don't want to have to figure it out and make all those decisions of what we're going to put in her lunchbox. So we already know Monday to Friday, what is she going to be eating? And we also do that for dinners as well. I just, quickly jot down, okay, so tonight we're going to have salmon, sweet potato, and a big salad. And even though I haven't meal prepped stuff, I have a plan sort of in my mind now written down on a little Post-it note. What are all of the meals, so that when you come home from work, you're not scrambling trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to eat? Whether you're cooking for one or you're cooking for a family of 4, it just, which you've already alluded to, I think it's key when you have fewer decisions to make. It just kind of makes your life easier, especially if you're working all day. We work all day in the office, we pick our daughter up from school, then we head home. And it's just nice to know, okay, I took out that chicken this morning, I'm going to pop that in the oven, and I'm going to whip up a couple sides, and dinner is like done in 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, is the like having a plan is meal prep.
Yeah.
I always find, just cutting and washing the vegetables sometimes is the most tedious part. So if I
Yes.
can assign some time and get that done, it's really satisfying when you're putting your meal together. Now, how are you finding that you're able to support. I mean, you've kind of alluded to this, is there's a lot of free resources. There's a lot of things that don't require a financial investment,
Hmm.
but oftentimes self-care requires a time investment. Um,
Yes.
so so how do you start encouraging people to carve out that time, especially if they know that there's value in it, they're just not able to find that time? How do you help consolidate or strategize with and like efficiency?
Yeah, totally. I think it's important to like look at, look at a 24-hour period, and what are all the different things that you're doing within that 24-hour period. After you have dinner, are you then sitting and watching Netflix for like 2, 3 hours before you fall asleep in front of the TV and then head to bed? I feel like everybody has at least 15 minutes, or maybe even more, of time that they could set aside for their self-care. I think a lot of people just don't even realize how much time they spend scrolling on social media, how much time they spend in front of a screen, but not working, just, whether it's a screen watching Netflix or just scrolling on Facebook. I think having more awareness of those sort of monotonous things that you do that just totally chew up your time. And then when you have that awareness, you can say, okay, you know what? I am going to start to go to bed just 15 minutes earlier, and I'm going to read something. And that's going to be my self-care ritual that I'm going to commit to for this week. And then next week, I'm going to try something else, because I'm going to see if it's something that I enjoy, if it's something that I can commit to. And if you start doing, you're like, oh, I just like hate reading. Like, some people don't like reading. Okay, you tried it, doesn't work, try something else. Maybe you go to bed 15 minutes earlier and you pop in your earbuds and you go on YouTube and you look for a free meditation that you can do. And, so it doesn't have to be an hour, saying, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to go run on the treadmill for an hour. First of all, that sounds really boring, but if that's something you want to do, great. But I think it doesn't have to be so time intensive. It can be, something else that I really enjoy is, I'm a huge tea drinker. And one of my rituals is at night, I love infusing a cup of tea, with herbs like lemon balm, passion flower, chamomile. It's just such like, it brings me so much joy. I love drinking tea. I love the whole act of infusing a tea and then putting a little honey or some stevia in it. And that's totally something that I do for my self-care. And it's so loving to do that for myself, because it helps me sleep. So hopefully that gives the listeners some ideas of how you can just, make it doesn't have to be like a lengthy experience.
Yeah, and I love, first of all, that tea drinking that you're describing just sounds so cozy and perfect, especially on these rainy days. But it's also interesting that, earlier you talked about the sympathetic response. When we're activating that rest and digest, our parasympathetic response, there's kind of the two branches. So there's that dorsal vagal making us a little bit more sluggish, and the ventral vagal, which does keep us alert but still calm and engaged. And I'm finding, particularly for anyone who's experienced any trauma, that engaging in activities that are more focused on self-care towards that ventral vagal response is really, what's resetting that pathway. So while it may seem inconsequential in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, you're doing so much repairing of damage. You're doing so much repairing and healing of that trauma. So these are such important tools, and it's important to highlight that and underpin that. So I think what you're doing and making it accessible is very important.
And I love that you brought that up too, because, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Were you going to say something else?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that you brought that up, because I think about something like meditation. So many people say, I'm a big fan of meditation and I love promoting it and talking about it. And so many people say, well, like, I do it, but I don't really notice the difference. And I say, well, did you notice that your mind was wandering? And oftentimes people say yes, and that's why I feel like I can't meditate. But just that, you're making progress. Just noticing that your mind is going off into those monkey brain thoughts again, and then bringing it back to your breath and bringing it back to your home base. is progress. So even though that 10 minutes of meditation, you don't feel like you're doing anything, you really are. You're making progress.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it comes back to that, these are practices I think that have been honed for centuries, and we're
Mm-hmm.
so lucky these days to have access to sharing different ideas with different cultures. It seems like every culture has unique and very well respected self-care strategies. There's the Turkish hammam, Ayurvedic hair oils, and the wellness industry in particular. We're at this interesting precipice because I think there's a lot of um, borrowing, maybe without a proper acknowledgement, but there's this reckoning where people are asking for that acknowledgement. Do you think, you know, that things are being appropriately acknowledged in the fact that there's, these centuries of tradition and lineage of how people meditation in the East, and the origins of these practices are being properly attributed?
I think sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I think it depends. Like if you use, Instagram as an example, you go on social media and you see influencers, whether it's they're slurping back their golden milk or, they're using sage to clear the energy in their home. I think some people are, and some people are just completely ignorant. They just, and I don't mean to say that in like a really negative way. What I mean by that, because I have been that way too. But what I mean by that is some people just are not even aware that it is important to acknowledge traditional cultures and where these rituals have come from. So that's something I definitely try and make sure I do, whether I'm sharing my turmeric latte, I like to educate people on where turmeric came from and the culture around that and why it's so important and why it's, an ancient healing food. So I personally do my best to educate people on that because I also find it's really interesting. It's good to know the history of where things come from. But, it's not to blame the wellness industry, but I have to say, like, a lot of times, I think that people just don't even know. I think things just, certain wellness practices in Western society become a trend, and people jump on this trend, and they have no idea that this trend is, from, it could be, traditional indigenous culture. And I think that people need to take more responsibility and learn, what's behind that. So I don't really know like how I feel because this kind of goes into the whole area of cancel culture and, taking someone down because they didn't properly appropriate something. What I think needs to be done is that more kindness and compassion needs to be seen on social media. And so if you see something out there and you're like, oh, that person has like no idea, then, if you're listening to this, like reach out to that person, send them a message and say, hey, did you know that what you're sharing, is a practice that indigenous cultures have been using for hundreds of years? And maybe you're kind of not really giving it the credit, you should consider that. I think that's a much kinder way than I feel like this is a whole other like rabbit hole, but like what's been currently going on in cancel culture. Instead, people are, publicly saying like, this person is doing this and that's wrong. Let's all gang up on them and cancel them. So just circling back to your questions, I think each of us need to be responsible for that, for educating and doing our own research, but then also we have to be responsible for our own reactions to how we treat others and always coming from a compassionate and kind perspective so that we can help others learn as well.
Yeah, thank you for saying that because I mean, I think there is a lot of disparity in how practices are being attributed, but then also in the response. And I think elevating different voices is also going to help change that narrative and support a lot of that work we want to do. And even in communication, in understanding, that is part of self-care. When we are more grounded and aligned, I think when we've invested that time in ourselves, going to the top of this discussion, then we're able to show up in our communities in a much more meaningful way. So of course, we're able to engage in more difficult discussions, I think, with clarity when we've slept properly, when we,
Yes, you're so right. Yeah, that's a really great point.
grumpy when you have no
This
sleep,
is
right?
so true. Yep, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just want to pivot the discussion a little bit to you've given us lots of examples on um, self-care ideas, and a lot centering around nutrition, as that is your background. Um, and we've also talked about the time investment. Now, sometimes people look to supplementation as a quick fix for that. If they're
Hmm.
not able to get the full nutritious diet, some people require supplementation because they have very specific conditions and they're trying to address imbalances. Where do you see supplementation fitting into a typical self-care regime?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, eating well is one of my self-care priorities. And, right behind it is absolutely supplements, taking the right supplements for me. And so I definitely make a point every day, every morning, and every evening. I have certain things that I take for my well-being. And, mushrooms, if we use an example, I'm a really big fan of like reishi. I use that to just help me, to support my nervous system, help me be calm and also kind of like focused as well. So I think supplements are, I always like to say supplements are supplemental to a good diet, but they are extremely important. And I think, that what you're doing with this podcast, obviously you're educating people on how, that can be a huge piece of the self-care puzzle. And it can really help, if someone is dealing with chronic stress, then, looking at a B complex vitamin, or, AOR has really great formulations, specific for stress. So I think, their supplements can really help to kind of fill in those gaps. Especially, fill in nutrition gaps, or fill in the gaps that, stress is such a nutrient intensive thing for your body. So knowing that if you do have a lot of stress and you're not making as much time for self-care, knowing that there are nutrients that can better support the body in the stress response.
Yeah, you said actually a few really salient points that I want to expand on. The first was, when you're in any state that is requiring a lot of nutrients, that is pulling a lot, like stress, absolutely you can't be working on even more of a deficit. So sometimes that supplementation seems helpful, but then you said right off the top, supplementation for your needs, and that
Mm-hmm.
is the key piece, right? It is like sometimes there are very clear cases I see in practice where supplementation is not the right answer for
Mm-hmm.
that individual, and I love that you said right away, it's for what you need at that moment, and you're reassessing. How frequently are you kind of reassessing or changing up a supplement routine?
Um, you know what? Sometimes it's like, it can be on a daily. Like for example, today, as I mentioned before our call, I'm feeling a little under the weather. So my daughter had a cold virus last week, which I've, kind of caught that. So, today I modified my supplement routine to take, more vitamin D, and a couple of other different things. So for me, it's really how I'm feeling on that particular day. But then there are certain things that I definitely, that I take, like my essentials, we could say. There's my essentials that I take every day. And then there's things that I add in, take away, basically just depending how I'm feeling and what's going on.
Mhm. And how would you promote kind of a safe and effective supplementation plan? I mean, what are you looking for in supplements?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think specifically about when you see people recommending or just talking about what they take. I'm always very careful with that. I'm just thinking of the example. I have a lot of posts on Joyous Health about rosacea. So, I have a whole entire post about natural health supplements for healthy skin. And what I always make sure I tell people is like, you need to talk to your naturopathic doctor, your certified nutritionist, because what may work, for one person may not work for you. So I think, in order for them to be safe and effective, it's really important to ask questions. I recommend working with a healthcare practitioner so you can figure out what is the right dosage, what is the right product for whatever your health concerns are. So I think it's really key. And whenever I lots of times people ask me, oh, what supplements do you take? I'm happy to share with people, but I always let people know, like, this is very unique to me. And you want to figure out what is best for you. So it's good to make sure you really do your research.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's a really important for people to hear from wellness leaders, is that it is not a one size fits all, and the benefit will come to you from the nuance. The benefit will come to you from finding the right dose and the right time to be taking things, when to stop,
Mm-hmm.
and tracks. So I think that's a really important note, and an important note I think that we can end on. I think you've covered so much ground in what self-care looks like, how people can start implementing it, and most importantly, the value of it, so that on those hard days when you don't necessarily want to sit and do your meditation, or you're feeling restless and you don't want to go to bed early, that you implement some regular changes and routines because you know the value of it. So thank you so much
No,
for.
thank you for having me.
And where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at joyoushealth.com. That's where I have, hundreds of recipes and resources for healthy living. And on social media as well, just search Joyous Health. You can find me there because I'm always sharing so much information, and it's all for free.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic, or email us at marketing@aor.ca.